While the lawyer read the will, the silence in the library was thicker than the dust on the old grandfather clock in the corner. Wren's cousins received a continental rail empire, a timber kingdom stretching across 3 states, and a chain of mountain resorts worth hundreds of millions. But when her turn came, the lawyer slid a small cream envelope across the table and said the words that broke her in front of everyone. Inside were 2 engraved silver certificates worth exactly $2. Your grandfather wanted you to have this. He said it was all you deserved. The cousins laughed so hard that one of them spilled champagne on her dress. What none of them knew, what nobody in that room could have predicted, was that old Silas Hawthorne had been a railroad man his whole life, and railroad men know that the most valuable thing on any line isn't the freight. It's the switch. Within 48 hours, those 2 silver certificates would prove worth more than every asset her cousins inherited combined, and an attorney named Phineas Larkspur would drive Wren 4 hours north into the Wapiti Pines, to a place no one in the family knew existed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you love watching cruelty receive its proper bill, hit that like button right now. Stories like Wren Kovach's only spread when people share them. Subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you, and leave a comment with your city. We have viewers from over 100 countries, and there's something powerful about seeing where in the world a story like this is landing. To understand how a 38-year-old engineer ended up standing in the rain outside the gates of Glenmar Estate holding a trash bag and 2 engraved silver certificates worth $2, you have to go back 10 years. Back to a phone call she almost didn't answer. Wren Kovach was the daughter of Silas Hawthorne's youngest son, Adrian, the forgotten son, the one who had walked away from the Hawthorne fortune at 22 to become a high school physics teacher in a small town in Pennsylvania, and who had married a librarian named Joanna instead of one of the daughters from the rail family Silas kept introducing him to. Adrian had died of a heart attack when Wren was 19. Joanna died of cancer 4 years after that. By the time Wren was 23, she was alone in the world, working her way through an engineering degree on scholarships and night shifts at a diner. She had met her grandfather exactly twice as a child. Once at a stiff Christmas dinner where she had been told not to touch the silverware, and once at her father's funeral where Silas had stood in the back of the church, refused to give a eulogy, and left before the reception. Wren had grown up understanding that the Hawthornes considered her father a failure and her mother a stranger, and that she herself was nobody's problem to think about. Then on a Tuesday afternoon when she was 28, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was old and gravelly and unmistakable. "Wren, this is your grandfather. I am 81 years old, and I have made a great many mistakes in my life. The largest of them was letting your father walk away. The second was letting you grow up without knowing me. I would like to fix at least one of those before I die. Will you come and see me?" She had been sitting on the floor of her studio apartment in Pittsburgh eating ramen out of a paper cup. Her engineering job at the time was a contract position that paid barely enough to cover rent. She had laughed first, then cried, and then she had said yes. She moved into the private East Wing of Glenmar Estate 3 weeks later. Silas had told her she was not a guest and not an employee. She was family. He gave her a suite that opened onto the gardens and a small workshop in the carriage house where she could keep her drafting tools and tinker with whatever she wanted. He hired her a tutor in chess. He insisted she keep her engineering license current, and every Sunday morning, without fail, the 2 of them would have breakfast on the South Terrace and talk about trains. That was Silas's true love, the thing the family had built its fortune on, and the thing he never stopped being a child about. Hawthorne Continental had started as a single freight line carrying lumber out of the Bitterroot Range in 1903, and Silas had grown up watching his own grandfather stand on the loading platforms in a wool coat counting cars by hand. Even after the empire had grown to include the timber holdings and the resort properties and the freight terminals across 41 states, Silas would still get up at 4 in the morning some days to drive himself to a switching yard outside the city and watch the locomotives shunt cars in the dark. He told Wren that the railroad was the only honest business left in America. The cars went where they were supposed to go, on time, full of what they were supposed to carry, or they did not. There was no fooling a freight schedule. He taught her chess at that breakfast table, hundreds of games over those 10 years. He told her, the same way he had told it to his sons, that the only move that mattered was the one your opponent didn't see. The board has 64 squares, he would say, but a good player doesn't see them. A good player sees the empty space, the thing that isn't there yet. Wren did not understand then that he was teaching her the same game he had been playing with the rest of the family for 40 years. Her cousins lived 2 hours south in a glass and steel compound called Hawthorne House. Augie was 39, a man who wore custom suits to barbecues and pronounced his own surname like a brand. Maxon was 36, quieter and meaner, the kind of man who collected vintage hunting rifles and used the word people to mean employees. Lyra was 33, the youngest, the only one of the three who had ever called Wren on her birthday, though she had stopped doing it after the second year. They visited Glenmar on holidays. They asked Silas pointed questions about his health, his attorneys, his estate planning. They watched Wren the way cats watch a bird they have decided to eat later. When Silas died peacefully in his bed 3 weeks before this story begins, 87 years old, and holding a worn-out wooden chess piece in his hand, Wren had wept for 2 days straight. The cousins had begun planning the will reading the same afternoon. The library at Glenmar had been transformed into something that did not look like a place where a man's last wishes would be read. It looked like a wedding rehearsal for people who did not particularly like the bride. Caterers had set up a long sideboard along the east wall, stocked with smoked salmon, oysters on crushed ice, and 3 different kinds of champagne. A pianist had been hired, though nobody was listening to him. Augie had brought his own photographer, a young man with 2 cameras and a vest full of lenses, who was now circling the room and taking candid shots that would later appear on Augie's social media, with captions about generational wealth and the discipline of inheritance. Wren sat in a wing-back chair near the back wall, in the same simple black dress she had worn to her grandfather's funeral. Her only piece of jewelry was a small brass compass on a chain that Silas had given her on her 35th birthday. The compass did not point north. Silas had laughed when he handed it to her and told her it pointed wherever she needed it to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Phineas Larkspur entered the library at exactly 9 in the morning. He was 68 years old, narrow-shouldered with a head of thick white hair he kept cut military short. He had been Silas Hawthorne's personal attorney for 41 years. He had drawn up Silas's first marriage license, his divorce papers, the incorporation documents for 2 of the resort properties, and the trust that paid for Augie's college tuition after Augie had been expelled from his second prep school. He carried a single leather folder under his arm. He set it on the reading table at the front of the room, and he did not look at any of the cousins. "Let's begin," he said. The cousins arranged themselves in the front row. Augie sat in the center, his wife Cressida beside him in a cream-colored suit that had cost more than the pianist would earn in a year. Maxon sat to Augie's left, already on his phone, scrolling through what looked like a cigar auction. Lyra sat at the end, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully arranged into something that was meant to look grieving, but kept slipping into anticipation. The will began with the smaller bequests. $200,000 to Mrs. Halligan, who had been the head of household at Glenmar for 32 years, a trust for the children of Silas's longtime driver, donations to a railway preservation society in Helena, and a scholarship fund at the engineering school where Adrian had taught night classes before he died. The cousins did not react to any of it. They were waiting. Larkspur turned the page. "To my eldest grandson, August Calder Hawthorne, I leave Hawthorne Continental Rail Freight, including all rolling stock, all freight terminals, all rail yards, and all subsidiary contracts associated with the operation." Augie made a sound that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh. He turned and pulled Cressida into a hard embrace. The photographer caught it. Augie was already reaching for his phone. To my grandson, Maxon Reed Hawthorne, I leave Hawthorne Timber and Lumber Holdings, including all standing timber acreage, the 4 mill operations in Idaho, Oregon, and Montana, and all associated logging and transport equipment. Maxon did not move for a moment. Then he smiled slowly and tipped his head back as though something he had been carrying for years had just been lifted off his neck. To my granddaughter, Lyra Imogen Hawthorne, I leave Hawthorne Mountain Resorts and Hospitality, including the 6 lodge properties, the Whitlock Springs Spa, the Conference Division, and all associated land holdings. Lyra exhaled. Her shoulders dropped. She had not been certain. None of them had been entirely certain, despite all the visits and the questions and the careful charm. They had all assumed that Wren, the granddaughter who actually lived with the old man, who played chess with him on Sundays and read to him when his eyes started failing, would be cut into the inheritance somewhere, possibly heavily. The 3 of them had spent a long time over the past 3 weeks calculating the percentages. Now Larkspur reached into the leather folder and removed a small cream-colored envelope, plain, unsealed. He walked across the library and stopped in front of Wren's chair. To my granddaughter, Renly Adrian Kovach, he read, I leave the contents of this envelope. My granddaughter will understand what I have given her, and she will understand why. He placed the envelope in her hand. She opened it. 2 engraved silver certificates, the old 1899 design with the eagle in the center, each one a $1 bill. $2. Across the top of the first, in tiny black ink that someone had hand-stamped into the paper, was the word patience. Across the top of the second was the word truth. The library was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then Augie laughed. It was not a small laugh. He doubled over in his chair. Cressida joined in a beat behind him, then Maxon, then a few of the staff who had been hovering near the doorway and did not yet know whether laughing was permitted. The photographer was taking pictures of Wren's face. Wren did not know what her face was doing. $2, Augie said when he could breathe again. 2 whole dollars. That's what a decade of sucking up to Granddad gets you. He stood. He walked over to the sideboard. He picked up an open bottle of red wine. Let me toast you, cousin. Augie walked back across the library with the wine bottle held loose at his side, the way a man holds something he isn't planning to set down soon. He stopped 2 feet from Wren's chair. He raised the bottle in a mock salute. He made a show of tilting it forward as though he were going to fill an invisible glass. And then he tipped his wrist and let the wine fall. It hit her chest first, soaked the front of her black dress to the waist, ran down her legs, pooled on the rug. The smell was sharp and sweet at the same time. Augie stepped back and looked at his work the way a man looks at a painting he had hung crooked on purpose. Apologies, cousin, he said. I forgot you don't drink. $2 won't get you the dry cleaning, by the way. Maxon was filming from the front row. Cressida said in a voice loud enough for the photographer's microphone, Sweetheart, if you need cab fare home, I'm sure one of the staff can spot you. Family helps family. Lyra did not laugh. She looked at the rug. She looked at her own hands. She did not say anything either. Wren stood. The certificates were still in her left hand. The envelope was still in her right. She did not wipe her dress. She did not look at Augie. She walked slow and steady past the front row and out the library doors. And she went up the back staircase to the suite she had lived in for 10 years. She did not pack much. She left the book Silas had given her. She left the chess set on the writing desk. She took 1 photograph in a small wooden frame, the one of the 2 of them on the south terrace on his 85th birthday, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. She put it in a paper grocery bag because she could not find a real bag fast enough. She changed out of the wine-soaked dress into jeans and a sweater. She walked back down the stairs. Augie was waiting in the front hall. 30 minutes, he said. I gave you 30 minutes. You took 18. That's the most efficient thing you've ever done in this house. He held out a black trash bag. For the rest of your stuff, Trash gets carried out in trash bags, right? It's only fair. Wren took the bag. She did not put anything into it. She walked past him, out the front doors, down the long stone steps, and into the rain. The gates of Glenmar Estate were a quarter-mile from the house. By the time she reached them, she was soaked through, and the paper bag was beginning to tear at the bottom. She stood at the iron grate with the photograph in one hand and the trash bag in the other, and she watched her cousins through the lit windows of the library, raising glasses, taking pictures, planning the rest of their lives. She looked down at the silver certificates in her palm. Patience. Truth. She started to cry. Not delicately. The kind of crying that comes up out of a person from somewhere below the ribs. A black Mercedes pulled out from behind a row of hedges and rolled to a stop beside her. The passenger window came down. Phineas Larkspur was at the wheel. "Miss Kovac," he said, "get in the car, please." She did not move. "Renly, your grandfather was not a cruel man. He was many things, but cruel was not one of them. Get in the car." She got in. The interior of the Mercedes was warm and smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco. Larkspur passed her a folded handkerchief from the breast pocket of his suit jacket. He did not say anything for a long time. He turned the car around, drove down the gravel access road, and pulled out onto the state highway heading north. After about 10 minutes, he spoke. "How well do you remember your chess?" Wren stared at him. "He taught you to think 5 moves ahead. Do you remember what he said about the 6th? She remembered. Silas had said the 6th move was for amateurs. The 6th move was the one your opponent expected. Anyone could see 5 moves out. The real game was played in the moves that came after that, the ones where the board opened up because of choices made years before anyone was paying attention. Your grandfather, Larkspur said, was a man who started planning today's chess game in 1986. His phone mounted on the dashboard lit up. He glanced at it and answered on speaker. "Mr. Larkspur, this is Garner from Hawthorne Continental Dispatch. We have a situation. The routing system is locked. None of the terminals can pull up live freight tracking. The maintenance department says the licensing certificate expired this morning." "I see." "Mr. Hawthorne, the new Mr. Hawthorne, is on the other line demanding I tell him who has administrative access. I'm telling him I don't know." "That's correct, Garner. You don't. I will be in touch." He ended the call. The phone rang again almost at once. "So, Mr. Larkspur, this is Olivetti at Timber. The cutting permits for the Bitterroot tract just bounced back from the state. They're saying the permit holder of record is a different entity. They're refusing to honor the harvest schedule." "Understood." A third call before he had finished saying goodbye. "Phineas, it's Marielle from the resort office. Every reservation system across all 6 properties just stopped processing payments. The merchant accounts have been suspended. We're being told the payment processor has terminated the contract." "Thank you, Marielle." He hung up. He glanced at Wren. The corner of his mouth lifted half an inch. "It's beginning, Miss Kova." "What's beginning?" "The education of 3 people who never learned to read a balance sheet." He turned off the highway onto a smaller road heading north into the Wapiti Pines. The drive into the Wapiti Pines took 4 hours. Wren spent the first hour staring at her hands. Larkspur did not press her to talk. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on his knee, and twice he answered short calls from numbers Wren did not recognize, and each time he said only, "Yes, I understand," and continue as planned. After the second call, she finally spoke. "What did he leave me?" "Really, everything that matters. That isn't an answer." "No," Larkspur said, "it isn't. But it's the answer I was instructed to give you on this drive. Your grandfather was very specific. He wanted you to see it for yourself before anyone explained anything to you. He said the explanation would be cheaper if you saw the place first." The road climbed. The pines closed in on both sides until the sky was a narrow strip of gray overhead. They passed no other cars. After 3 hours, they turned off the paved road onto a gravel drive that was unmarked except for a small wooden post painted dark green. Another 20 minutes of driving on that gravel through old-growth lodgepole and Douglas fir, and the trees opened into a clearing. Wren leaned forward in her seat. In the middle of the clearing, set on a short section of restored rail track, was a passenger car. A 1924 Pullman heavyweight observation car, painted dark green with gold lettering along the side that read Hawthorne in block letters. The car had been mounted on a stone foundation and connected by a covered walkway to a small log lodge built into the slope behind it. Lights glowed in the windows of both buildings. Smoke rose from a stone chimney on the lodge roof. The whole property was tucked into a fold of the mountain so that no road, no flight path, no satellite map, at the resolutions most people had access to, would ever show it. "What is this place?" Wren said. "This is your grandfather's true house. He bought this land in 1971, the year your father was born. He built the lodge in 1986. The train car was added in 1994, after he had it pulled out of a scrapyard in Ogden and restored over the course of 2 years. He came here every summer for 40 years. None of his sons knew it existed. None of his grandchildren ever set foot on this property. Only 3 living people knew about this place before today. I was one of them. The woman who is about to walk out of that lodge is the second." The lodge door opened. A woman in her early 60s stepped out under the porch light. She wore a wool cardigan and jeans and house slippers, and her hair was the color of iron. She walked toward the car with the kind of unhurried confidence that came from 40 years of knowing exactly where every door in a house opened to. Larkspur pulled up beside her and rolled down the window. "Mrs. Bellwether, we've arrived." Tindra Bellwether looked into the car. Her eyes were sharp and pale gray, and they did not pretend not to be evaluating Wren. After about 3 seconds, the corner of her mouth softened. "Hello, Renly. I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time. Come inside. You're soaked through." The interior of the lodge was warm. A fire was going in a stone hearth. The walls were lined with old framed photographs, and Wren did not have to look closely to see that most of them were of her. Wren as a child, standing on a dock somewhere with her father. Wren in a graduation gown. Wren and Silas on the South Terrace. Wren in her engineering workshop at Glenmar, focused on a draft. Not aware she was being photographed. 40 or 50 pictures going back further than her own memory. "He had a man," Tindra said behind her, "a retired Pinkerton of all things, who used to send him photographs every 2 months, long before you ever moved to Glenmar. He liked to know how you were." Wren did not trust her voice. Tindra handed her a towel. "Eat something first. Then he wants to speak to you. He's dead." "Yes," Tindra said. "He is, but he left a message." She led Wren and Larkspur down the covered walkway to the train car. The vestibule door was a polished oak with a brass key plate set into the center. The key plate had a slot in it, narrow and rectangular, the size of a folded bill. "Your grandfather had it built this way," Larkspur said. "He found it amusing. Placed the certificates in the slot." Wren took the 2 engraved silver certificates from her pocket. She folded them together along their long edge. She slid them into the slot. There was a soft mechanical sound, like a small clock winding, and a green light came on above the doorframe. The door clicked open. Inside, the train car was lit by warm brass sconces and the glow of an oil lamp on a small writing desk at the far end. The interior had been preserved as it would have been a century ago. Mahogany paneling. Green velvet seats along one wall. An open observation platform at the rear behind a brass-railed doorway. A working pot-belly stove halfway down. And on the writing desk beside the lamp was a small flat-screen monitor that did not match anything else in the room. A note was taped to the corner of the screen in handwriting Wren knew as well as her own. "Renly, press play. Then come find me at the desk. S." She sat down in the leather chair facing the screen. She pressed the play button. Silas Hawthorne's face filled the screen, 86 years old, alive, looking directly at her. "Hello, Wren," he said. "If you are watching this, then I am gone, and your cousins have done exactly what I expected they would do." Silas was sitting in the same train car when he recorded it. Wren could see the green velvet of the seat behind him, the brass edge of the lamp on his left. He looked tired but clear-eyed. He was wearing the gray flannel shirt she had bought him for Christmas the year before he died. "I want to tell you a few things," he said. and I want to tell you in the order that matters. Your father was the best of my children. He was also the only one who ever told me the truth to my face. He left because I would not let him be himself, and that is a debt I have spent the rest of my life trying to repay. The day you walked into Glenmar, I started repaying it in earnest. Every Sunday breakfast we had on that terrace, I was paying your father back through you. I hope he saw it. I hope he forgave me a little." Wren had to put her hand over her mouth. "Now to business," Silas said. "Your cousins are not bad people in the sense that they are evil. They are bad in the sense that they have never been told no. I am to blame for that. I gave them too much, too early, and I watched what they did with it, and by the time they were grown, I understood that none of them could be trusted with the company. So I built a different company. I built it underneath the one they could see." He picked up a pencil from the desk and tapped it once on the wood. "Hawthorne Continental, the rail business, looks like it owns its own freight routing software. It does not. The software is owned by a company called North Switch Logistics, registered in Delaware. North Switch licenses the software to Hawthorne Continental on a renewable contract that runs out every January 1st. Hawthorne Timber looks like it owns its own state and federal cutting permits. It does not. Those permits are held by a holding entity called Bitterroot Forestry Trust. Hawthorne Mountain Resorts looks like it owns its own merchant accounts, its own reservation systems, its own liquor licenses, its own water rights. None of those belong to it. They belong to 4 different subsidiary companies, all of which are themselves wholly owned by a single parent holding entity. That parent holding entity is called Hawthorne Heritage Trust. And the controlling share of Hawthorne Heritage Trust, Wren, is the $2 instrument I had Phineas hand to you this afternoon. Those silver certificates are not currency. They are bearer shares. The serial numbers on the back of each one are the access codes for the entire structure. There is one share. It is in your hand. You own all of it." Wren felt her ears go hot. She looked down at the silver certificates folded on the desk in front of her. Patience on one, truth on the other. "I'm sorry I had to do it this way," Silas said. "I needed your cousins to behave like themselves in front of witnesses. I needed it on record. I needed you to walk out of that house with nothing in your hands, because the moment you did, the entire question of whether you deserved any of this answered itself. The answer is yes. You always did. Phineas will explain the rest. Mrs. Bellwether will feed you. There is a man named Roan Westmoreland who has been managing the Heritage Trust for 16 years. He is downstairs right now. He has been waiting for you. He is loyal, he is competent, and he will follow your instructions. He will also tell you the truth even when it costs him to do so. Trust him." Silas stopped. He looked at the camera for a long moment. "One more thing. You will be tempted to be merciful. You should not be merciful right away. Your cousins need to understand what they did today, and they will only understand it through the consequences. Be slow. Be deliberate. Make them hold the silence long enough to hear themselves in it. After that, after they have sat in the dark for a while, then you can decide whether to turn the lights back on. That choice is yours. I did not raise them. I let other people raise them, and that is part of why they are what they are. So I am giving the choice to you." He almost smiled. "I love you, Renly. I'm sorry I had to put you through any of this. Good night." The screen went dark. Wren did not cry. She had cried herself empty at the gates of Glenmar. She sat for a long time with her hand on the desk. Then she stood up, walked to the rear of the train car, and pushed open the brass-railed door to the observation platform. There was a stairwell built down into the platform floor. It had not been there a century ago. It led underground. Larkspur and Tindra were waiting at the top. "Your grandfather had it built into the foundation when he restored the car," Larkspur said. "Most of what you actually own is below us." The stairs went down 4 flights into a space carved out of the mountain itself. At the bottom was a steel door with a small panel for a hand. Wren put her palm on it. The door clicked open. The room behind it was the size of a small warehouse. Long tables of monitors, all of them lit. 2 operators at workstations who stood up when she walked in. Maps of the freight routes glowing on the walls. A man in his early 50s, gray at the temples, in an untucked blue shirt and reading glasses, was standing at the central console. He came around the desk and held out his hand. "Miss Kovacs," he said, "Roan Westmoreland. I worked for your grandfather for 16 years. I've been hoping to meet you for 10 of them. Welcome home." 3 months passed. Wren moved into the lodge. Tindra gave her the upstairs bedroom, a long, narrow room under the eaves with a window that looked out over the rail spur where the Pullman car sat. She kept the brass compass on the nightstand. The 2 silver certificates went into a small steel box in a wall safe behind a frame photograph of her father at age 12, holding a baseball glove in the front yard of a house Wren had never seen. Every morning at 6, she descended the 4 flights to the command room. Roan Westmoreland met her with coffee and a printed brief, the way he had met Silas every morning for 16 years. The first week he taught her the freight routing software her cousin Augie now could not access. She read the source code in 2 afternoons. She'd been a systems engineer before she ever moved to Glenmar, and the rail logistics platform was, underneath the polish, the kind of large-scale optimization problem she had spent her 20s solving for less interesting clients. She found 3 inefficiencies in the algorithm by the end of the second week. Roan logged them as proposed updates and watched her work with the expression of a man who had been hoping for exactly this and was trying not to show it. She learned the timber side from a woman named Greta Holm, a forester in her late 50s who flew in from Missoula and stayed in the lodge for 4 days. Greta walked her through the cutting permits, the sustainable yield calculations, the relationships with the state foresters, and the tribal councils whose land bordered the Bitterroot Tract. Wren took notes by hand, the way Silas had taught her to take notes. By the end of Greta's visit, Wren had already drafted a proposal to convert 2 of the old-growth sections into a permanent conservation easement that would generate carbon credits and a small federal land payment, while still allowing the mill operations to run at 90% of capacity. The resort side was the easiest for her to grasp and the hardest for her to feel anything about. 6 lodges, a spa, the conference division. The merchant accounts and reservations were already running again, but only because Hawthorne Heritage Trust had quietly resumed processing payments under a new contract that Lyra had no idea existed. Lyra was not aware that her resorts had stopped accepting payments for 10 days, then started accepting them again, with the cash flowing into Heritage's accounts before being released back to her on a delayed schedule. From Lyra's perspective, the resorts were running, just barely. The cousins were a different matter. By the end of the first month, Augie's freight operation had stopped functioning. Trucks were leaving terminals on schedules that nobody could route or track. 2 major shipping clients pulled their contracts. Augie hired a forensic IT firm out of Chicago that took $120,000 and concluded that the system was working perfectly. Augie fired them and hired another firm, which charged him $200,000 and arrived at the same conclusion. He fired 3 of his own people and called Larkspur 11 times in 9 days. Larkspur did not return the calls. By the end of the second month, Maxon's mills had been idle for 47 days. He was paying 840 employees to stand around. 2 of the 4 mill towns sent delegations of workers to his office in Coeur d'Alene asking what was happening. Maxon, who had never spoken directly to the people who worked the saws, told them that the situation was being addressed at the corporate level. He did not have a corporate level. He had a personal assistant named Greer and an accountant named Boyd, who was already drafting bankruptcy paperwork in a separate folder. Lyra was holding on the longest, mostly because she had not yet realized she was failing. The resorts looked operational. Bookings were coming in. But her cash flow had become inexplicable. Money she expected on Tuesdays arrived on Fridays. Sometimes she got 80 cents on the dollar. Sometimes she got the full amount. Sometimes she got a wire from a payment processor she had never heard of, with a memo line that read settlement adjustment. She called her bank. Her bank told her that everything was in order. She called the bank's compliance department. They told her the same. In the third month, the cousins began borrowing. This was the part Wren had been waiting for. She had told Roan on the morning of her 10th day in the lodge that she did not want to drive her cousins into bankruptcy through the systems they thought they owned. She wanted to do it through the debt they would take on trying to save those systems. Roan had looked at her for a long moment and then said, "Your grandfather would have done the same thing. You're his granddaughter twice over." By the start of month 2, Augie had taken out 3 private bridge loans against the freight terminal real estate. By the end of month 2, Maxon had mortgaged the timber acreage to a regional bank in Spokane. Lyra, the slowest to panic, took out a single large loan against the Whitlock Springs spa property at the start of month 3. Wren bought all of it. She did not buy any of it under her own name. She did not buy any of it under the name Hawthorne. The acquisitions were handled through 4 different shell entities that Roan set up across 3 states. Each one was a small, plain limited liability company with a generic name, the kind that bankers see 20 times a week. The originating creditors were happy to sell. The loans were already showing signs of trouble, and the offers came in at slightly above market value in cash, with no questions asked. By the end of week 10, Wren held every dollar of debt her 3 cousins owed. She turned to Roan one evening in the command room and said, "Set the meeting." The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Wren rented a conference suite on the 34th floor of a glass tower downtown, 6 blocks from the old Hawthorne House compound. The suite had a long walnut table, 12 leather chairs, and a wall of windows that looked east across the river. She booked the entire floor for the day, so there would be no other tenants in the elevator bank, no other faces in the hallway, nobody to soften the experience. Roan handled the invitations. The cousins received nearly identical letters from a holding company called North Switch Logistics, signed by a managing director they had never heard of, requesting a meeting to discuss the immediate disposition of their outstanding obligations. Each letter referenced specific loan numbers. Each letter included a copy of the original loan agreement with a single line highlighted in yellow at the bottom of page 4, the line about full assignability of the debt to any successor lender. All 3 cousins called their attorneys. All 3 attorneys, after a few hours of research, called their clients back and told them to attend the meeting and to bring their checkbooks. Wren arrived at the suite at 12:30. She wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored for her in the 2nd month, a white shirt and the brass compass on its chain, tucked under the shirt collar so that only the chain showed. Her hair was pinned back. She wore no makeup beyond a little color on her mouth. Larkspur arrived at 1. Roan arrived at 1:15 and set up 2 laptops at the head of the table connected to the wall display. At 1:45, Wren turned her chair to face the windows. She had practiced this small piece of choreography. She wanted her back to the door when they walked in. The cousins arrived together. Wren heard the elevator chime, the receptionist's voice, the shuffle of 3 people walking down the hall in expensive shoes. The conference room door opened. Augie spoke first, without looking around the room. "We're here. Let's make this quick. I have somewhere to be at 4, Larkspur said from the side of the table. Mr. Hawthorne, Miss Hawthorne, please sit down." There was a pause. Maxon said slowly, "Phineas, what are you doing here?" "I represent the principal of North Switch Logistics. Sit down." The cousins sat. Wren heard the chairs scrape, the small sounds of 3 people arranging themselves at the wrong end of a table without yet understanding why it was the wrong end. She turned her chair around. Augie's face went through 3 expressions in less than 2 seconds. Disbelief, fury, and then something that was not quite recognition but was close to it. "You," he said. "Hello, Augie." Cressida, who had come in behind her husband and was still standing, said, "What is this? What is happening?" "Sit down, Cressida," Wren said. "This isn't about you." Cressida sat. Lyra had not said anything. She was looking at Wren with both hands flat on the table, and her face was very pale, and she had not blinked in 10 seconds. "I'd like to walk you through some things," Wren said. "Roan, the first slide, please." The wall display lit up with a corporate org chart. The cousins stared at it. 3 months ago," Wren said, "you inherited what looked like an empire. What you actually inherited were three operating companies that don't own most of what they appear to own. The freight routing software at Hawthorne Continental is licensed from a Delaware entity called North Switch Logistics. The state and federal cutting permits at Hawthorne Timber are held by a separate entity called Bitterroot Forestry Trust. The merchant accounts, the liquor licenses, the water rights, and the reservation systems at Hawthorne Mountain Resorts are held by 4 different subsidiary companies. All of those entities, every single one of them, are owned by a parent holding company called Hawthorne Heritage Trust. The controlling share of Hawthorne Heritage Trust is a $2 instrument that Granddad gave to me on the afternoon you poured wine on my dress. Augie made a sound that was not quite a word. "This is fraud," he said, "and this is some kind of fraud. He couldn't have done this legally." "He did it legally," Larkspur said. "I drew up the documents myself, beginning in 1986. They have been on file in 3 different states for 40 years. Your grandfather built this structure when your father was still in college. Nothing about it is recent. Nothing about it is contestable." "Roan," Wren said. "Slide 2. The display changed. It now showed a list of 15 loans with dollar amounts beside each one. The total at the bottom of the column read $47,300,000. "Over the past 10 weeks," Wren said, "you 3 have collectively borrowed $47.3 million from a variety of regional and private lenders. You took those loans against the operating companies you inherited. You did this because the operating companies stopped functioning, and you assumed that throwing money at the problem would solve it. The problem was not solvable with money. The problem was that you do not own what you thought you owned." She nodded at Roan. The 3rd slide came up. The 15 loans were listed again. Beside each one was the name of a different shell company that had purchased the debt. "Every loan you took," Wren said, "is now held by me, through entities I control. You do not owe regional banks. You do not owe private lenders. You owe me. The full amount comes due in 30 days. Maxon said quietly, "We can't pay that." "I know." She slid 3 single sheets of paper across the table, one in front of each cousin. Each sheet was an offer to purchase their inherited operating company for $2. "You have 30 days, she said. "Sign or don't." She stood. "I'd like you to think about it carefully." She walked out. Augie tried to fight. He hired a litigation firm out of Seattle that charged him a $60,000 retainer in the first week. The lead partner spent 11 days reading the Heritage Trust paperwork and then sat down with Augie in a conference room and told him plainly that there was no fraud, no elder abuse, no undue influence, no procedural defect, no missing signature, no contestable provision anywhere in the structure. Silas Hawthorne had built the architecture across 40 years and 3 states with the help of an attorney who was still alive and lucid and prepared to testify. The partner advised Augie to take the $2 offer. Augie threw a coffee mug at the wall and fired him. He hired another firm that came back with the same advice 9 days later. Maxon tried to negotiate. He sent 2 intermediaries, then his accountant Boyd, then finally his own wife Hadley, who showed up at the lodge gates on the morning of day 22 with a binder full of partnership proposals. Mrs. Bellwether met her at the gate, accepted the binder politely, and told her that the principal was not available. The binder went into the fireplace that evening. Wren did not read it. Lyra did not do any of those things. Lyra called Larkspur on day 8 and asked in a small voice whether her cousin would consider seeing her alone. Larkspur passed the request to Wren. Wren did not answer for a full day. Then she said, "Not yet, after it's signed." The contracts were signed on day 30. All 3 of them sold their inherited operating companies to Hawthorne Heritage Trust for $2 each. The papers were signed in Larkspur's downtown office on a Wednesday afternoon. Wren was not present. She had asked Larkspur to handle it without her. She did not want to look at her cousins' faces while their pens moved across the page. She had thought about whether that made her weak, and she had decided it did not. She had decided it meant she had spent enough of her life looking at their faces. The press conference was the following Tuesday. Wren held it in the ballroom of the Whitlock Hotel, which was, she pointed out dryly to Roan that morning, now a property she actually owned. 43 reporters showed up. 3 financial networks carried it live. She stood at the podium in the same charcoal suit she had worn to the conference room 3 months earlier, and she read a short, prepared statement. My name is Wren Kovach. I am the granddaughter of Silas Hawthorne. As of last Wednesday, I am the sole owner of Hawthorne Heritage Trust, which controls the operating assets of Hawthorne Continental Rail Freight, Hawthorne Timber and Lumber Holdings, and Hawthorne Mountain Resorts and Hospitality. The 3 operating companies will be consolidated under a single restructured organization within the next 90 days. The new organization will be called Hawthorne Continental. We will be implementing a profit-sharing program for all employees at every level of the company beginning January 1st. We will be establishing a $5 million annual scholarship fund in the name of Adrian Hawthorne, my father, for first-generation college students in the rail, timber, and hospitality regions where we operate. I will take a small number of questions. She took 11 questions. She answered each of them in 2 sentences or fewer. When a reporter from a financial paper asked what price she had paid for the operating companies that had previously belonged to her cousins, she said, $2 each. They accepted the offer. The room went very quiet for about a beat and a half. Then 43 reporters started typing at once. She left the podium. 6 months later, Hawthorne Continental was operating at a profit margin 3 points higher than it had ever achieved under Silas. The freight routing software, with the 3 modifications Wren had submitted in her first month, was running 15% more efficiently. The 2 old-growth conservation easements in the Bitterroot Tract had generated their first round of carbon credit revenue. The resort properties had introduced a sliding scale program for regional school groups. 2 business school journals had requested case studies. Wren declined both. She did, however, agree to one final meeting. She held it at the lodge. Augie, Maxon, and Lyra arrived in a single rented sedan on a clear Saturday morning in October. Tindra met them at the door. They walked through the lodge without speaking. Wren was waiting for them at the long table in the dining room. 3 folders were laid out in front of her. I'm going to offer you something, she said. I want you to listen before you answer. She slid the folders across. I'm building 3 new divisions inside Hawthorne Continental, a short-haul electric freight pilot, a reforestation and timber-to-fiber operation, a regional, affordable lodging chain in mill towns and rail towns where workers can't afford a hotel room when their relatives come to visit. Each one needs someone to build it from the ground. The salaries are modest. There's no equity at the start. After 3 years, if the divisions are profitable, you'll receive a small stake. If they aren't, you won't. You'll work under managers who will not be afraid to fire you. You'll live where the work is. The jobs are real. They're not gifts. Maxon opened his folder first. He read for a long time. He did not look up. Why? He said finally. Because Granddad didn't want you destroyed. He wanted you to learn something. I'm not sure you have yet, but I'm willing to give you the chance to. Lyra was crying quietly. She had not said anything since she walked in. I don't deserve this, she said. Probably not. Take it anyway. Augie was the last to speak. He looked at Wren for a long moment. Whatever he had been planning to say did not come out. He nodded once slowly and closed the folder. They all signed. Wren walked them out to the porch and watched the sedan pull away down the gravel road. She stood there for a long time after the dust settled. The pines were quiet. The brass compass was warm against her chest. She went back inside and made a pot of coffee and sat down at her grandfather's desk in the train car, and she got back to work. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.